question I have, and maybe a question for that you could clarify for the audience is, so we're alleging that these products significantly increase the risk of necrotizing enterocolitis, correct? So do babies have NEC without taking, like if they're just on breast milk, do babies get this? Premature babies, regular babies? Is this, tell me a little bit more about that.
So it's mostly just the premature infants that are going to get necrotizing enterocolitis. And a premature infant can get NEC without getting the cow's milk formula. But once they introduce cow's milk formula, it increases the chance of getting surgical NEC, which is really what we're talking about, by 90%. 90%. And Jose has really studied the science and the marketing that you're talking about. I mean, it's like just like tobacco. It's like this really bad habit that, they want to get moms hooked on it for, like you're saying, well, it's very easy to do. And they want to make it, they advertise their product as being just like, mother's milk. That's what they're advertising. And they talk about how good it is for the infant. And while it's not as bad for a full term baby, for a premature infant, it really should not be fed. I mean, cow's milk based formulas and fortifiers should be removed from the NICU.
Banned. So Jose, in your opinion, is this kind of formula, the fortifiers in the baby formula, causing NEC and killing preemies?
Yes. So causation is it's a legal question, right? And so it's complex for sure. And to just sort of pivot off your previous question, I mean, there are babies that do get NEC who never had formula. So it is something that happens, but it is relatively unusual. In other words, even in our own shop, when we were out trying to get cases to begin this litigation, if a baby had NEC, in almost every situation they had formula. I mean, from our own internal study, that's almost like a given. We heard a story recently that in the Nordic countries, they have an exclusive human diet for premature infants, and necrotizing enterocolitis is almost unheard of in those countries. So causation is one of these things where in the law, the question becomes, is it more likely than not that this particular product caused a certain condition, in this case, necrotizing enterocolitis? When you have dramatic epidemiology like this, where the statistics, the correlation is so dramatic, it really draws the ability for a fact finder, whether it be a juror or a judge or anybody else, to conclude that this product was a substantial factor in bringing about that condition. The law is never about perfect answers. You never know in the law that someone is guilty, for example, in the criminal law. But the law doesn't require that. Even in a criminal case, you only have to prove that someone's guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. In a civil case, it's the preponderance of the evidence. And in this particular context, it has to be a substantial factor. So in that context, this is an extremely strong case. I mean, you compare it with, for example, the tobacco industry, the tobacco litigation. Are there people who got cancer who never smoked a cigarette in their life? Of course. That doesn't mean that tobacco doesn't cause lung cancer or other types of cancer. Of course it does. And that's a well-established, well-accepted concept now. It took decades for that to be accepted in various circles, but it's well accepted now. What I want to point out, though, about these cases, though, that makes it even more dramatic than many of the torts that are out there on this causation question is a thing that's called temporal causation. And with cigarette smoke, for example, and I always sort of compare with tobacco, the the development of cancer happens over years, even decades, right? And so the ability to connect it up, even logically, intuitively, is harder. Even though we know from studies that tobacco greatly increases the risk of cancer, that temporal distance between the smoking and the actual development makes it maybe a little harder to logically arrive at a conclusion of causation. Our cases here are very different. And I'll tell you a very quick story about one of the cases that I handled. When Steve had talked to a mother, I said, well, if Steve's talked to her, I got to go talk to a mother. So I talked to a mom here in Connecticut, and I wanted to learn from a mom exactly what her experience had been. And so she told me about her baby who was receiving human milk, exclusive human milk. This mom was producing ample amounts of human milk. And she had specifically said she only wanted her child fed her own human milk. And one night she fell asleep. She lactated before she went to bed. And she finally fell asleep, exhausted, as many mothers are who've delivered premature infants. And overnight, without her permission, formula was fed. There were 2 feedings done throughout the course of the night. And that next morning, she literally woke up to find her baby with his intestines exposed. They had been removed from his belly. This awful bacteria had literally eaten alive his little baby intestines. And this baby ultimately died. It is dramatic when you combine the science that we're talking about here, the significant increased risk, the relative non-existence of cases that are exclusive human milk, and then you compare it with a timeline like this, where a baby goes from being perfectly healthy overnight after being fed this thing. It would be like if someone smoked a cigarette and then developed cancer the next day. Can you imagine how compelling that story would be? Well, that's what we have here in many cases. And so we have the science, but we also have temporal causation. So to circle back, do I believe that cow's milk infant formula causes necrotizing enterocolitis? Absolutely, without a doubt in my mind.